Welcome back to another episode of Adventures in Machine Learning. I'm one of your hosts, Michael Burke, and I do data engineering and machine learning at Databricks. And I'm joined by my co-host,
Ben Wilson. I look at logs at Databricks.
And today we are speaking with Matt Van Italie. Matt studied at Swarthmore and Harvard Law, and after getting his JD, he entered the professional world as a consultant. And after about 4 years at McKinsey, he moved to help manage public schools in the Baltimore and DC area. Then after that, he entered tech, specifically focusing on impact-focused consulting and development, and today he works at Sema as a founder and CEO. This organization focuses on uncovering legal and regulatory risk in software. So, Matt, starting with a super technical question, why did you decide to settle in Baltimore?
I was moving up and down the East Coast. First off, I'm so glad to be here. Super excited. Second, I'm going to pull up an Excel spreadsheet to answer that question, maybe some pivot tables, because it's pretty technical. I was moving up and down the East Coast and looking for a place to settle down when we had kids. And Baltimore has so many good things about it. Great quality of life, great access to other cities and grandparents and all of that. And it's been a wonderful place to call home.
Nice. And was it a good jumping off point to work in the public school district because you're so close to DC?
Yeah, so after I was a management consultant, I did about 5 years serving school districts in and around in the United States, low-performing school districts. I did it in Baltimore. I was chief of analytics for the school district. I was in New York. I was in DC. I did some time in Cleveland. When I was, it was really the last stop. Working in the Baltimore City schools was my last stop on the direct education service journey, and so decided to put down roots here.
Awesome. Yeah, so for a little bit of context on my end, I've been volunteering with a nonprofit called Learn to Be. They provide free online tutoring to a similar demographic, it sounds like. And I worked with a lot of their raw data processing, basically who should be accepted as an applicant, who should not. Are the students learning? That's a really difficult challenge. So what does data look like in these systems? And what are the challenges surrounding that?
Of course, the fundamental challenge and the grand challenge, probably one of the hardest policy questions on earth, is how do we take poor kids and pull them out of poverty, and how can we help use the educational system to do that? I've lived for a while now and had the opportunity to work on some pretty hard problems, and I think that is one of the hardest. Multi-generational poverty is such a challenge first and foremost for the families who are affected. I'm the son of a math teacher. You heard beforehand I coded early, and my father was a coder too. So I have a moral commitment to data, and so that's my bias, but I do come in and believe that understanding data and applying the right context to it can make almost any problem better. Huge caveat for the context. Data without context. Are you writing more lines of code? For God's sakes, right? Like you gotta put the context in right. In the context of the educational system, I absolutely am in favor of high quality assessments that understand how much students learn, running them regularly to make sure they're getting the right kind of education. We've all been in classrooms or settings where we've been taught something we already know or something we have no way of understanding, and that stinks. And just because kids are the same age doesn't mean they have the same educational need. So the only way to know that is to ask them, do you know this or not? And then map educational work to it. So on one hand, rigorous quantitative testing, I'm definitely in favor of. But on the other hand, understanding schools and systems of schools, you have to bring in the qualitative expertise. And the absolute best way I've seen it is professional teachers who become observers to do classroom visits. And what they're looking for in those inspections and visits is just really simple. What percentage of the time are the students, observed students, what percentage of the students, are engaged in an instructional activity? Are they writing? Are they reading? Are they taking notes? Are they asking questions? And of course, that becomes a form of quantitative data as well, but it's only observable truly by the qualitative use of professionals. And the combination of the two tells a really rich story about how much students are learning and whether the classrooms they're in are set up for their success.
Got it. And is student evaluation the primary use of data, or is it more at a meta level at the school level?
Oh, what a great philosophical question. So, um, different people disagree, but you asked me on the show, so I'm going to tell you what I think. Um, I think there are lower stakes and higher stakes uses of data, and that there is not a substantive black and white difference between when you're using it for lower stakes and when you're using it for higher stakes. It's all on a spectrum. And the question I like to ask is, how do we put that data to use to improve outcomes? As an example, if you had these instructional experts come into a classroom in September and observe that 0 out of 30 kids, 30 is too many, but it's real, 30 out of 0 kids are getting instruction, there is a coaching conversation with that teacher. How do we move it from 0 to more than 0? If you come back in October, you have another conversation. If that conversation is in May, unfortunately, it usually takes that long and it's still 0, that teacher is not a fit. When it becomes coaching and when it becomes evaluation is there's a ton of gray involved at the adult level. At the student level, maybe I do have a slightly different framework. It's just all about time on task of growing. What do you know now, and how can we help you learn more? And so to me, that's not judging in any negative sense. That's understanding what you know and freaking celebrating how awesome it is to learn, and celebrating that by giving kids, in this case, but it's true for adults too, the instruction at a level that they need. Judgment has nothing to do with it. And it is about helping them become the fullest person, the most knowledgeable person they can be.
Right. And does ML come into play?
So it's been a while since I've worked in the ed tech space. Let me think on this for a little bit. So AI, broadly speaking, can be used. I was a consultant, so you're going to get a taxonomy. Again, that's what you get for letting me on. AI can be used as part of a product. It can be used as part of an internal tool. It can be provided by a vendor, and it can be used for coding, to help coding. That's not a completely exhaustive list, but I think those are the major categories. So just in, let's say, in the school district's case, the school district is not a vendor, so it's not applicable. The school district could be using it could be purchasing it as a vendor, so they're not providing it as a product function, but they're using it as a vendor if they get ML or AI from their suppliers. They could be doing internal data science on the results without using a tool. And if school districts don't have a lot of coders, they use commercial off-the-shelf software, but the vendors could be using it. I am a very big fan. Does taxonomy make sense?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So for the software providers providing in educational ed tech services to school districts, the word I know best, they are providing it, in that vendor role. I would expect them to be at least experimenting with machine learning to see what insights they can get to produce more useful and more actionable information for teachers, and more actionable insights about students. I certainly would recommend that every developer on Earth, barring a tiny number of circumstances we can talk about, has access to at least one, preferably two, high-quality GenAI coding tools, because it is such an advancement in developers' productivity and work satisfaction. So I really hope the ed tech company is doing that. Then within the school district, certainly would expect some machine learning, data science on the results. I do like matching. You want to match the tool to the situation. There's an awful lot you can tell from pivot tabling. To bring that up again, if 10% of students were learning in October and 11% were learning in November and 12%, you don't need anything fancy to know that the rate of change is not great. But there certainly are circumstances, especially with large districts, that it becomes a big data problem where you'd want to apply ML to it.
Got it.
I've got a question that might be super frustrating, but it's what I've been thinking of the whole time that you've been talking.
Please.
Big tech gets a lot of money. The defense industry gets a lot of money. And like yourself, I'm a child of a public school teacher in math as well. What do you think would happen if the sort of funding that goes to the DoD were applied to public school education and the focus of technological advancements and the application of those tools were applied to the public education system?
I actually am a believer in robust defense spending. Full disclosure, and I think the ROI of investing in kids in a serious way would have literally generational level impact on our country. And let's just talk about our country, but it's true anywhere. The difference in life outcomes for the students and their children and their grandchildren of being pulled out of intergenerational poverty, first and foremost, is so impactful to them, but has community level impacts, has national level impacts, that I would be incredibly supportive of a serious and methodologically defensible method of investing deeply and pulling kids out of poverty. And tech is part of it. I know you were talking about giving money to tech, but so much of it is about human capital and supporting the teachers and having the right teachers and instructional supports for them to deliver that kind of impact. With reading about was it Jonathan Kozol? I'm going to embarrass myself. Just yesterday, about a scholar who's been writing about kids in poverty and schooling for 50 years. I'm so sorry, I don't remember his name exactly. And 50 years of really marginal, if at best, improvements in students' abilities to read and do math, etc., and life skills. And what would it mean if 50 years ago we really started spending the money in the right way? That would really, not just more money, but money spent in the right way with accountability. Not most importantly, their lives would be better, but communities would be so much better too. I'm guessing, Ben, you think the opposite, and the answer is to cut education budgets and build more submarines. Is that your sense?
I mean, as a former U.S. Navy sailor who was on submarines,
Oh, in that case,
I'm not pro get rid of all DoD funding. I think that's insanity. However, I think that societies that invest more in human care and the betterment of society through education and social programs that enable that. So even if your parents are incredibly not wealthy, you still have the same shot as everybody, as the kids of the most wealthy, so that it's an equalizing forcing function on society to say it really is up to you, and society is here to bolster you up. It's stuff that I think about randomly sometimes, where I'm like, where would we be when I'm working on like some new feature that we're talking about building in our software product? I think like if we had invested differently 100 years ago in this country, and there were, instead of having this, you know, single digit percent of people who are coming up with technological innovations over time, and instead it was something like 30% of society was able to have the education that's required to come up with these ideas, would I be working on something different right now? Just due to the nature of what the tech zeitgeist is focusing on, would we have been at a point of having readily available, you know, GPU instances running in some cloud 40 years ago? And would we now be working on something completely different? it's something that, I don't know, just randomly comes to me sometimes. I'm like, what would
Yeah.
life be like if we had made different decisions as a society?
And obviously, we have such a long ways to go, but relative to 250 years ago, 1/10, 1/5 of America, when 5% of Americans had full opportunity, rich white men, and we've slowly but absolutely steadily have brought in women and people of color and people with lower incomes to have chances. Are we? And the women example is really powerful to me because to me, in my mind, it just happened so fast, and in our lifetimes with things like Title IX and breaking down barriers of women in the workforce. The idea that a country could be or a community. I'm a Boy Scout, and thinking about leaving your campfire better, leaving your community better. It's instilled in me. The idea that you could, anyone with a straight face, could say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take half of our human capital, and we're going to say you're not worth it. And of course, we did more than that with people of color. That um, you do wonder how we would be better, and all you can do now is contribute in all the different ways that we can in giving more people their real shot, which I just think is such a beautiful way to put it, Ben.
Do you think money is spent well in the public sphere?
It's a hard question. It's a really hard question. Um, as a general rule, I would like more more research and more accountability to the connection between money spent and outcomes. I think we've done enough experimentation to know what does and doesn't work. We know high quality teaching works. Um, um, and I'd like more money spent on things that we know work, a little bit of money spent on testing, and less money spent on things that we're pretty confident don't work.
Very diplomatic. All right. That makes sense, though. It's the only argument that I've heard against giving more funding, but reallocating funding seems, I mean, without getting too political, it seems like at least an interesting thing to consider. Because again, investing in the country and the future of the country uh, is for sure going to have an impact. And military is almost like an insurance policy. You'll only need it when you really need it. And in that case, you will fricking need it. But if there's peacetime between all countries, we would reallocate a ton of money to very different things. And Ben, out of curiosity, you said what would you be working on if we had reallocated? What would you be working on, do you think?
Well, I wanted to offer a rebuttal to
Please.
what your comment just was about DoD, because I do know about that. And I
True.
did see things that civilians that I knew at the time and have known since, where people are like, Ben, what did you think about the littoral combatant ship? And what a dumpster fire. Like, yeah, some decisions were made uh, that maybe weren't the best in hindsight. But the real reason why I think people find such a problem with DoD spending, and they see this price tag associated with something like, oh, this aircraft carrier costs $3.5 billion. Like, have you ever been on one? Do you know how many moving parts are on that thing? And the fact that it's not an economy of scale. There's equipment on one of those ships, like the arresting catapults for an aircraft carrier, for instance. Um, they're 120 feet long, 40 feet tall, 30 foot wide, and incredibly complex. It took 40 something years to develop, like just design those things and build prototypes and test them to make sure that, they're capable of stopping a several ton aircraft traveling at 140 knots uh, on the span of an aircraft carrier. So complex stuff, they only make a couple of them. So they're very expensive and all the parts and stuff. But when you talk about programs where there's some massive investment because somebody thought it was a good idea to do something or are trying to predict for the future, their outlook, they say, hey, we're no longer deep ocean navy. We don't need that. That's not a threat in the world right now. We need coastal support because that's the type of conflicts we're in right now. We need to launch missiles onto, from 10 miles out to shore targets. So that wasn't it wasn't the best way of going about it, like how they built them and designed them. And what I saw when I was in, um, and have paid attention to since, is I don't think the it's not what the DoD does, and it's mostly a deterrent force. At least the U.S. military is, um, particularly the Navy. Don't mess with them because whoa, they have a lot of ships and aircraft. It's more the reason that bad decisions get made is more political. I think the process itself is broken, and everybody's terrified to fix it. So when you're in this hierarchy, and the same thing I've seen in big companies too that I've worked at, where you're middle management, you're responsible for this one thing and this project, that spans multiple years or decades sometimes. You're terrified of being the whistleblower, even if you see it on in the project, early on in a project like that a big company now is tackling, like in tech. Early on is your first 2 weeks, like you're doing designs, you're especially with like software and stuff. Early on in a DoD procurement process, that's 2 years into that. And if you're like, hey, this is a bad idea, you're terrified of getting fired or your performance ratings, you'll never advance up. If everybody's doing that, and that's the culture of fear, nobody's ever going to speak up. Or if they need to get funding from Congress, which they do for these things, you now have to play the political game of the 4-year cycle of elected officials in Washington to say, we made a mistake. We actually don't need that money. We're going to go a different direction. Congress is going to flip out, and they do frequently. So, yeah, there are things that could be fixed, but I think the culture needs to be fixed about how all of that stuff works, about what are we spending money on? Why are we spending it? That's my take on the public funding, and I think that extends way beyond the DoD. That's just public funding in general. Like, because taxes are controlled and the expenditure of taxes are controlled by an elected body of representatives in this country, that's why it's broken.
Hmm. Yeah, so Matt, you worked in that space for a while. Is there a reason that you left?
Hmm. Yeah. Um, it's extremely, extremely important work, and I have such incredible respect and admiration for the folks who do it day after day, year after year, decade after decade. After 5 or so years in the space, I came to the conclusion that it wasn't the best fit for my personality. And organizations, people need to match. Uh, it's the career advice I give. Need to set them. The best thing people can do for the world is make sure they're working in a job where they are a good fit for that. And uh, the way I comport myself is better suited for the private sector, especially high growth or fast change organizations. And I was ultimately able to lead a healthier life and hopefully long term um, make the most kind of contribution despite not directly serving.
Interesting. Okay. So you went into the tech space. Was this a pulling force that you wanted to write software, or why did you decide to go into this area specifically?
Yeah, so I went from working immediately in school districts to working for an ed tech company. And so I think the thought process was I care deeply about education, and I am ready to return to the private sector, which sounds cliched, but it was absolutely true. I was ready to return. And while I was there, my interest focus shifted from the content of ed tech to the content of engineering, running engineering teams, helping engineering teams do their best work, and the systems of high performing software companies. I loved thinking about the systems of school districts systems of schools within school districts, systems of classes within schools. And so being able to think about systems of software companies check the box on being able to do system thinking, and was a fit to my metabolism is a better fit for working in the private sector.
Got it. So it seems like you've gone from law school all the way sort of in a very whatever the word is, a very non-direct route into this tech space. Do you think that non-direct route was beneficial and gave you more of a generalist skill set so you're more dynamic? Or would you have rather have specialized early? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great question. Any good career advice is a statement is true and the opposite is true. And both of those, I actually think one of the best pieces of I ever read in law school was something called Competing Canons of Construction. Construction is how you understand a law. Competing means at odds, and canon are rules. And basically, Carl Llewellyn, a realist scholar in the 1920s, found a whole bunch of legal things that sound true and like, yeah, sounds good, and found the opposite that also sound good, and said, listen, when we say we're picking a reason because it sounds good, a canon, there's an equally compelling counter canon that also sounds good. So let's be realists and decide what we're actually doing and not use the analogy. Let's actually get to it. I think that's totally true, actually, in so many things, but including career advice. So the career advice alternative is, and let's call it the Sheryl Sandberg view, get to the top of your field as fast as possible, because once you are recognized as a leader in your field, then you can move from place to place, already having established yourself as a leader. The advantage of that is you get to work on problems of scale repeatedly. You immediately have trust in all of the places you go. It's, I think, a more comfortable life for sure if you get as fast as you can to the top and then go in different directions. The counterexample, I'm going to use an analogy from Captain's Courageous. Did either of you by chance read it growing up? Ben, maybe?
Yes.
No? Okay. So rich brat, I think late 1800s, going on a voyage with his parents back to the sea, of course, all things go back to the sea, falls off the boat and is picked up by a sailing crew, and they lift him out of the sea, and he goes into his back pocket to pull out money to pay them to say thank you, and he's lost his wallet. It fell out, and so instead of going into his pocket, he has to extend his hand and shake their hand to say thank you. And to take the path like that I have taken, which is reinventing myself at least 3, maybe 4 times in a 25-year period, I've had to not rely on some of those other things, a wallet full of status, although I've been incredibly lucky to have some extraordinary training, and had to learn things anew and learn cultures anew. The advantage of that, the disadvantage is it's hard, and there are some difficult moments along the way. The advantage is I feel so freaking lucky to have seen a really diverse set of experiences that inform what I do today. And I certainly, to the extent at all, I'm a decent CEO and founder, it's because of what I've learned along the way. I thought long and hard about teaching, about how to use data to understand what teachers are up to. That absolutely informed the right and wrong ways to think about what developers are up to. Very similar. It's incredibly similar. And it's super easy to get it totally freaking wrong of how to use data to understand teachers or software developers. Also, I started this business Sema because, so again, I was adjacent to tech, but was a consumer of it. I went to this ed tech company, and I sat in an executive team meeting with extraordinary professionals. And I know the story sounds coined, and I have told it many times, but I swear to goodness it's true. The chief revenue officer pushed a button on Salesforce at the executive team meeting and said, hey, executives, here is the status of sales, and here's the status of our sales team. And everybody understood, and everybody nodded along. And then the chief marketing officer pushed a button on HubSpot. All right, and here's the status of the marketing. Here's the status of our marketing efforts. Okay, so we have code that serves as a chief X officer tool to help understand what's going on. And you know where this story is going. The chief technology officer, who is great, I love you, Chris, stood up and said, here are 15 pages of PowerPoint and some spreadsheets to explain why we need to do a refactoring. And I didn't know what a refactoring was. And I was like, did you like, my head is exploding. Salesforce is code to understand sales and salespeople at the executive level. Is there not code to understand code and coders at the executive level? What are we doing? And that insight, right, was the basis of our first product, Sema. And no way, you're sort of in the water. You don't know that you're a fish or whatever. If you're a fish, you don't know what water is. I certainly come to this with a different perspective, having had all those other experiences before I got to and frankly fell in love with enterprise tech. I doubt, certainly if I was doing it for status, I'm sure that would have been one thing, but it's never, my choices have never been status. They've been impact and challenge and growth and a chance to do some good. And I wouldn't trade it. That's a very long answer, but I wouldn't trade it. But anyone who's thinking about that path, my God, is it full of stress? And I'd listen really hard to Cheryl's advice and seriously consider just getting to the top and having a career like that.
I find it just incredibly logical and also inspiring to see the way you thought about the careers that you're working in. But with respect to, you basically took the model of analysis of a classroom or a school district and said, there's a parallel here that a team of developers, like software engineers, would probably not even see. And it's not something that is ubiquitous everywhere that I've been when working with software teams. I've seen the most dysfunctional groups of people working together where it's competitive, cutthroat. People are trying to burn one another. You look at like PR reviews and stuff they're submitted. It's hostile. People calling each other idiots and stuff. And you look at what that team produces, and the corollary to that is an underfunded, teachers don't care, kids are children of very bad upbringings, a completely dysfunctional school where nobody's really doing anything because they've lost motivation. There's no system in place to support them, and there's no visibility. Their little echo chamber that they're in, they don't even realize how dysfunctional it is, I think. And I saw that with software teams too. Because working as a consultant, you end up talking to hundreds of different teams, and some of them you walk in the room, you're like, man, everybody here hates each other. I can tell. Like that is the vibe I'm getting from walking in this room. And then you start talking to them, asking them questions, and people start getting threatened and feeling like, hey, who is this guy who's coming in here, telling us that our house is not in order? But it is just like that. And when you go into a really well-functioning team, you see the manager is basically like a vice principal, a director is like a principal, VP is like a superintendent, and then your teachers are your team leads who are there, working with everybody in different capacities. It's all customized. So your very senior ICs, they don't need to be taught how to code. Their code's good. Like they know what they're doing. They might need to be taught how to do a product proposal or do a design better, or just how to communicate their ideas better. So you have customized learning plan for that person. But then when you have a new engineer that's coming into your team, you are teaching them the fundamentals. You're going back to, hey, welcome to first grade. I mean, not first grade, like freshman year of college.
Courses. Yeah.
And you're walking them through this thing that's not taught in university because it's not applicable to that, but it's still the same process. So those people are teachers, whether they realize it, recognize it or not. So it's fascinating to me to see this is the product and the person that formulated this by applying that same sort of pattern to it, because it makes total sense to me.
Very well said.
Yeah. So what are the tools that you look to enable this sort of teaching environment within a software team?
First and foremost, code reviews. Actually, that's not true. First and foremost is taking very seriously the privilege and responsibility to be able to be on a team. And I have found in every kind of organization I have ever been a part of in my entire life, the most important thing you can do to help make a team better is make sure that people who don't fit and aren't contributing have some chance to improve, but then have to leave. And all listeners, just think through classes you've had where someone didn't pull their weight, think through teams where someone didn't pull their weight. It brings down everybody. It just makes you feel like a chump, and it is hard to be heading in the same direction. Listeners, also, you must guarantee that by listening to me, you will follow this. Never, ever call your business a family, because your business is not a family. Your business is a team. You're a team working on performance of achieving the outcomes for the organization and its users. Teams cut team members. Families don't cut family members. And your job is to help serve your users and your customers and the organization. And it's all correlated to taking seriously the hardest thing as leaders, but the most important thing, and you can lead from anywhere from your seat, it's not the title, is determining people who shouldn't be on that team need to go. So that's number one, broadly, every organization. For coders, number two is code reviews. How unbelievable is it that coding is a craft, it's not a competition. How incredible is it that this amazing career path of coding is not only the chance to build things, but a chance for learning from colleagues all the time, to get that kind of substantive feedback 2, 5, 20 times a week. Are you kidding me? On top of on top of the comp, on top of getting to solve problems, that you actually get to grow as humans. And so getting a really positive, doesn't mean fake positive, I mean constructive code review process is just think is incredibly important. And then after that, I'm pretty much an experimentalist. I'm not a professional coder, and so it is for the team to be continuously checking on their performance, seriously thinking about blockers, seriously and thinking about what could unblock, whatever the heck those things are, and to be thinking about technologies that can improve their work and improve their quality of life. We're at the beginning of the adoption of coders using AI to code. You think, we're at the, I don't know, Ben, if this is overhyped. We're at maximum adoption of open source. It's used, people love it, it is absolutely understood. Using AI is beginning days of open source. It's going to transform, in my opinion, a very good way for developers. So it's just one technology, one obviously I'm thinking a lot about, but just more broadly, leadership, and especially non-technical leadership, need to be thinking hard about just incessant focus on blockers and getting rid of them, and a commitment to experimentation, or at least looking at potential changes, because technology always changes fast, and it's only going to change faster.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the state, sentiment of people are comfortable using OSS. It is used everywhere now. And a lot of great contributions come to those projects and keep them in states of quality that rival proprietary software, in my opinion.
Rival and exceed in some cases. React, yeah. Rival and exceed.
And with the GenAI stuff, I've interacted with some other, teams at other companies in my current role. And it's one of the things that always comes up, just out of a curiosity. It's like, hey, how many people at your team are using Copilot or GPT-4 and how are you using it? Because I know how we use it. Every day, every single engineer uses it. And it's not, hey, write my code for me. For what we do and what we're building, there's no way that PR would merge. It's just the broadness of the context that you need in order to build something a certain way. But it's more like I need to make a tactical decision here, and I need to decide in my head. I know there's 4 ways of doing this. Please give me the 4 prototypes that can explain this so I can put it into a document so I don't have to spend the next hour handwriting 4 different, you know, explanatory prototype code snippets. Or, hey, I'm not quite sure about what you did on this PR. Like, I see what you're doing here, and I can follow along. I just want to double check if this is the most optimal way to do this with this other contextual bit of information that I have in my head that we want to support
Mhm.
in the future. Writing up prompts, writing down your thoughts into the GPT-4 and asking it that question to give the context, which then allows you to be like, oh, that's the term I was thinking of, and I forgot what it was called. Now I'm going to go search in the source documentation or source code for this library that I'm using and get the real answer here real quick so I can give a link to the person. Say like, hey, let's think about this instead. It saves so much time. And that's really what anybody who's not using it and who's writing software who's not using it to help them draft up designs, write docs, uh, and assist during code review for just generating code examples or recommendations for fixes, or as a linter. If you don't have a good linter for some esoteric, pattern that you're using, it's amazing at that stuff. So I've got 2 windows. One is reserved on one of my monitors. One half of it is just for my code interface, where I have a 4-page long prompt that I've written to help me with specifically Python open source development. Then I've got another one that's configured for docs. I've got another one that's configured for Scala, and they all do different things, and they're invaluable.
Well, Ben, thank you for coming to my podcast on why developers should use AI. I completely agree. Let me say a couple different things. I'm sure you guys have seen, I hope you've seen Inception. Yeah. So the world builders who have the ability to conjure something by thinking about it and constructing it. I think the prototyping nature of GenAI absolutely reminds me of that in code, but also not in code, in documents. Has hallucinations. You got to treat it seriously. But for the can I conjure something and see what it looks like at a high level of detail is so expansive. Gives you such opportunity to experiment without being weighed down by the details of it. So I think that's incredible. Second, I do think, Ben, I heard you say, and if I can for a teaching moment, some people's concerns are, well, I'm going to have GenAI write it for me. And there's that very strong sense I've heard from some people, the code is writing it, is doing the work for me. I know a lot of developers who are afraid of what it means as from an identity conversation. Am I really a developer if I'm using GenAI? And I like to say to them, are you a real developer if you use open source? And if the answer is absolutely yes, why would I rebuild something that already existed? My work is not just a keyboard jockey. My job is to think about what the right solution is to
Yes.
start thinking about it from the beginning and bring the right solution to bear. And so I know there were engineers on our team. We were working on an AI product for 6 months, and engineers came to me and said, is it really okay that I'm using AI to do this? And that's why I say, is it okay for you to use open source? Yes,
Mhm.
it is bananas not to use open source. If your company has allowed it, and I'll cut to that point third, it would be bananas not to use AI for all of the reasons that Ben so eloquently said. The third point for folks who are in management positions, um, this isn't too self-promotional, but we have white papers that you should give to your leadership teams and your lawyers about why everybody should be using, every engineer should have at least one high grade, enterprise grade AI tool at their fingertips. Sema does not sell these, so I'm hyping legal documents. The ROI in almost any possible situation for coders is so substantial, combining their job satisfaction, their productivity boost, the ability to mitigate the risks. The risks are real, but they are absolutely mitigatable. And the cost of an enterprise grade product, the ROI is out off the charts. The finance team needs to understand it, and then the legal team and compliance teams need to know how they can overcome those risks. But it is absolutely in almost every possible situation the right answer, as long as it's implemented the right way with the right safeguards. Side note, if the organization is not letting the developers do it, developers are doing it anyway. So it is in almost every situation. So let's not pretend that the choice is adherence to no GenAI code in the code base versus GenAI code. It is bring your own LLM to work, which is such a problem from a data leakage issue, such a problem from a management issue. That is the real choice. 92% of developers are using GenAI today. They use it at home. They use it everywhere. And it's not Copilot and ChatGPT Enterprise are not at 92% adoption. Companies need to be honest with themselves, look at the risks. If you really, really think it's not appropriate for all of your code, okay, fine, but then put in some tracking to make sure people aren't using it and explain to people why they can't. Much better, have a system in place to manage those risks and give everyone access to the right tool with the right enterprise grade security protections, etc.
Yes. Yeah. So to give a little window into field engineering, we are not allowed officially to use ChatGPT. I use it many times a day, and I just pay out of pocket. And the rationale for like not being able to expense ChatGPT specifically and like having licenses for us is there's a worry that there will be customer data leakage. At least that's my understanding, and I could be wrong. That said, we officially support Copilot and give enterprise licenses there. But the amount of times that I've thought about just spinning up a Databricks endpoint and hosting a closed source LLM just for my team to use and use customer code, uh, I've almost done it many times. The core issue is that typically those closed source LLMs are a little bit worse than ChatGPT 4, and so the the decrease in quality isn't worth it for me. I would rather just abstract customer specific information and then put that into ChatGPT. But that's at least how I've seen field engineering do it. I'm not the most up to date at all on field engineering policy, but as of like 6 months ago, that's what it was. And so
And I
yeah,
really would, and I think you, Michael, raised a really good point. We don't recommend just one tool. Give engineers more than one because they are specialized enough, and the ROI on multiple ones is still great. It's still great. The hard part is what your engineers are doing at work. Put them to use at the maximum potential, and not everyone. Michael's a great example. Is a great counterexample. Not everyone at our companies that are listening to this is going to be as conscientious as Michael on sufficiently sanitizing the data before it is shared. And so, because it is so powerful, not for like selfish reasons, Michael's not doing this to shirk. He's doing this to deliver the best possible outcome for his customers. Make it easy for him to do that safely. The Michaels of the world, which is everybody, make it easier for them to do it the right way. So I wouldn't stop at one tool necessarily. If your engineers can make the case for a second tool as well, as long as it's the right kind of enterprise grade and it checks the right kind of boxes, give them the ability to use multiple to the right. You wouldn't give them one application. Let them only use one application. Don't require people to use one GenAI tool because they're sufficiently diverse at this point.
Ben, what's your Gen AI stack?
Some things I can't mention because we haven't released them yet, but robust. I'll leave it at that. Lots of internal stuff that Databricks is working on, but also, Copilot, GPT-4. I've got plugins within my IDE that can call both of those services. I've got, chat interfaces. We built one for MLflow, like an open source server that can interface with GPT-4. I use that in a terminal just to feel cool, I guess. But yeah, I have multiple ways of interacting with them open right now, actually. One of the things that's related to Sema, though, that I saw GPT-4 do just a couple of days ago, we were responding to a security alert that an open source security researcher found on one of our repos. And They write up this private report, and of course we go to investigate it. And while validating it and getting a reproduction, of course I'm going to, take an example of my fix and the previous code and submit it to GPT-4 and say, hey, I'm trying to solve this weird, hacking vector that where somebody can basically access the server's operating system, LFI attack, through this really clever, submission to a REST API. And the response that I got from GPT-4 was, your solution fixes this problem. However, it exposes an additional one that wasn't there before. And here's how to fix it. And I'm not a security researcher. I'm a back-end, software engineer that knows a very embarrassingly little amount about front-end dev. And certainly no expert on, web traffic and stuff, and certainly not security. And I just looked at that and I was like, this thing just saved me from creating a vulnerability because it just has this broad, general, contextual reference set in its training data that very few humans would be able to understand all of that context. Like, do they exist? Of course. But they're not writing code anymore, generally.
And they're not sitting next to you doing your code review.
Exactly. So it's the ultimate pair programming partner. It boggles my mind that people don't want to use it, or companies are saying, yeah, we can't let you use that. So you're now taking your entire engineering development team and holding them back from productivity. Well, every one of your competitors who's using and embracing this technology, they're turning each of their engineers' time and doubling it without having to spend any money and build a bigger team or build more teams.
Yeah, and let's be super clear. They are doing it. No one's doing it for nefarious reasons. They're doing it because the risks. This is new. It could be dangerous. Sema, we've absolutely honored to serve some of the world's best organizations, and they've had us study this for 9 months now, thinking about how to mitigate risks. And of course, tell whoever's listening to go talk to your counsel, but the risks are overcomable. The risks are overcomable. You can prevent data leakage. You can get intellectual property protection for your code. You can deal with maintainability issues. You can deal with code quality issues. That they're all solvable. Are there some situations where the risk of data leakage is so gigantic that you really need to think twice? Maybe the folks who are using COBOL to upgrade our nuclear arsenal system, maybe you want to keep that away from the public internet. And maybe the equivalent of the software that's the secret Coke formula, maybe you have certain repos that are off limits, but they are so few and far between relative to the huge advantage in advancing safely your intellectual property and advancing your developers. I just can't stress it enough. We did our focus is AI in the SDLC, but we've been putting together ROI, return on investment cases for other uses. On the short list, the highest one we've seen is GenAI in the SDLC. We estimate at least 40% return on investment using some pretty conservative. I'm sorry, 40x, not 40% return on investment. Document review is so well suited for machine learning, but even that's an AI is maybe 15 to 20x. Please have your compliance teams talk to us, look at our documentation, and read what we've said and the research we've done, and come to your own conclusions. But the guaranteed benefit of your developers using it compared to risks that absolutely can be mitigated. My hope is we can sit in March of 2025 and say it is as bananas not to use GenAI when you code as it is bananas not to use open source. We're not there yet. Maybe most developers think it's a really good idea, but as an organizations, we're very as a whole, organizations are lagging behind, and I want organizations to get to be as bananas as not using open source. Write it by hand. Figure it out yourself. We don't make it. We build our own frameworks here. Like it is that transformational. And if you really want to know what I think, it is bigger than open source. It is like internet level disruption. And so if you could with a straight, because it's not just coders, it's every function, it changes different parts of the workflow. Honestly, we tell this to all of our clients, you have a year to figure out putting in at scale where it makes sense, AI solutions across your teams and across functions, because otherwise, as Ben said, your competitors are doing it and you're already falling behind, but you will be toast. You'll be toast in a year. So lean into the compliance side, figure out what you can and can't do. You can't do all. I'm not saying every single thing needs to be re-architected, but start with all the high ROI use cases. Document review, coding, customer support should be enabled. Prototyping, every step of the prototyping process should involve GenAI. Write the business case, look at the market research, write 5 different counterexamples of the business case, then prototype it, then anything prototyping related, the whole thing is 10 times faster. And so those start with the higher ROI ones, and then go from there. But it is the faster you get there, the less likely it is you're going to be left behind.
Where is Sema hanging its hat and sort of focusing on from an intellectual property perspective, and where is Sema avoiding?
Give me an example of avoiding. Do you mean like the scope of our products?
Yes.
Got it. So our primary AI related product is called the AI Code Monitor, and it is detecting the amount of generative AI used in code bases, independent of what LLM is being used. The use case for that is helping understand where developers are using it and are not, including a developer level view so they can get access. They can see how they're doing compared to what they could be doing, and understanding their own stats, because that's the best way for craftspeople to get better, is to have data at their fingertips. But then also keep track of, at a global level, the compliance perspective on are we using GenAI the right way? 30 seconds of terminology. In open source, once you pick the right library, you should try incredibly hard not to modify it, because it's been tested, because it's more secure, because if you start modifying it, you won't be able to keep using the version. You should keep open source pure, unmodified. The absolute opposite is true for GenAI. Once you get it, you need to review it for correctness, for security, for understandability. You need to make it yours and put it in the context. That's blended GenAI. Blended GenAI in almost every situation is better than pure. Now, of course, you can pull in individual lines, whatever, that might be exactly right. But the mental model of open source, this code that came from somewhere else, not from me, and I'm just going to insert it but not touch it because it's right. Everyone needs to unlearn that for GenAI and bring it in. Definitely bring it in, but then modify it to make sure it works, to make sure it's understandable, etc. And so helping engineers and helping companies, so at the individual level, developers should be seeing how much is pure versus blended. At the company level, if 50% of a customer-facing code base is pure GenAI, it's probably 25% is pure GenAI. It's probably time to worry, because you worry about maintainability, worry about quality. It's possible. It's possible that it can be okay, but as an organization, folks need to know and start looking. So that is our focus for the AI Code Monitor. There's plenty of gigantic problems in AI that we are not solving. This one is a pretty fun one, and one that's keeping us busy.
Cool. Well said. I understand the product perfectly. Awesome.
It's pretty slick. I mean, any listeners out there who are unfamiliar with it, go to their website, semasoftware.com. You'll see some very interesting dashboards that get generated for all these different products, for just getting a snapshot view of, for that product, what are you trying to look at? Like your development team, or this, I've got it up on another screen right now, just looking at it. the code base composition report. It's pretty fascinating stuff where you can kind of see where are we overextended here potentially, and how are we using this. From a CTO perspective, I think this is absolutely critical if you're concerned with stuff like that. Like, are we overusing this, or where are we using this? And I'm sure you can tie this potentially to, why did we get this huge bill this past month? Like, who's using this so much? Because otherwise, if you're a leader in tech and you need to understand that, and you don't have that mental map of all of these different projects that are using services like that, you're just going to have to start email blasting out all the tech leads saying like, hey, who owns this? Who's doing this? What's this for?
You're very kind. All kudos to our extraordinary product and engineering teams and implementation teams who've put their heart and soul into this. I'm really proud of them, and it's such a privilege to work on something that matters, as you both know very well.
Yeah. All right, one final question before we wrap. Your tagline is "You save $1 trillion." How?
Ooh, I may have to. So at Sema, good things happen because of the team. Bad things happen because of the CEO. So if this is an error on our website, I will take responsibility for it. Our AI product is our second product. Our first product, one of the dashboards Ben's alluding to, is like a credit score on code bases. It's sort of a CTO dashboard, but at a point in time. And when we use that in what we call moments of evaluation, and the particular one, especially where we got started, was technical due diligence. When a potential advisor, investor, or an acquirer is planning to invest or buy another software company. We also help with sell-side diligence, so helping companies getting ready, taking the SAT in advance to see what you're going to score on the real thing. We have, through that product, analyzed companies worth over $1 trillion worth of code. So taking the market valuations of all of those companies, it exceeds $1 trillion. If it says saved, I'm going to go look it up and fix it immediately, because that is, we tell the truth at Sema.
That's exactly what it says.
I was
exactly
incorrect.
what you just explained.
I misspoke. So thank you, Matt, for calling me on that.
Not at all. If it was wrong, nobody's perfect, but we fix errors as soon as possible, and that would be a big one. But it is such a freaking honor, and it's not just our clients and our advisory partners, but organizations who've put their whole life's work into building a business, and then like literally getting goosebumps, and then let us be a part of their process to decide what happens to their company and their lives and their family's financial future. It is an unbelievable honor to be part of just helping people achieve their dreams by getting investment and selling their businesses.
Speaking as someone who has looked into random code bases more times than I would choose to admit, and not this, like, now I just do it with open source, and usually it's pleasant. Look at an open source repo and you're like, yeah, they know what they're doing here. It's very interesting design that they chose, and I can see why they did that. And you can strip all the comments out of most open source packages as a professional software engineer, and you can read it. You understand what the heck's going on for the most part. However, on the enterprise software side, where it's a small team of people, maybe 30, 40 people are committing to a repo over a period of 10 years. I've walked in too many times to something like that, and I'm just like, who designed this? Like, how do you even find where an entry point is to this code base? And how do you interface with this API? It makes no sense. Like, I have to write 4 YAML configs, save them into a directory, then call this module as a script to read from those. Then that's called from an API, which then has a REST wrapper going through proto definition. Like, who thought this was a good idea? So I think that's fascinating. And it makes perfect sense to me why VCs would contact your company and say, can you do a report on this? Because we want to know if this is a lemon or not. Is this all hype, or is this actually like legit? and the tech that this company is buying is worth it.
Well, now, gentle listeners, remember the beginning of this conversation when we were talking about understanding classrooms and understanding helping making systems of schools better. I believe in assessments, quantitative assessments, but I also believe in the qualitative reviews. Now that you have that analogy, mind-blowing for talking about code, you see what's coming. The absolute best way to understand a code base is also a combination of the quantitative and the qualitative. Absolutely. R-scan is quantitative. If you have 10 high-risk CVEs, and if you have 1,000 current developers, and you have 10 high-risk CVEs, you have a very rigorous security program in place. You have very high quality, and this is pre-triaging. So like the 10 would be in the back end or something like that. If you only have 10, you have an unbelievable program in place. You have the right tooling. Engineers have time and the roadmap to do it. If you have 10,000, you almost certainly don't have a tool. You laugh, but they're there, man. Companies that size, we see a lot. They probably don't have the tooling, but they, by definition, have not given developers enough time to do it. And what's so fun about treating code as math is then you have to do it by segment. You can't just treat all companies on it's 100, a little, or a lot. Well, it depends on how big the code base is. But if you start with the quantitative data, if a company has 0% unit testing, 1,000 developer company with 0% unit testing, and 1,000, even 1,000 high-risk CVEs, and developer turnover is 40%, you know a lot about that company before you open their code base.
Yep.
And that's the effect, some of the things that not an effect, those are literally things that the Sema scan does. But then you have to turn it over to the qualitative experts, to someone who can look at the architecture. Architecture is not reducible to test scores, right?
Right.
Something like that. You need both. But man, oh man, can you go faster? And folks like Ben know what questions to ask if you start with the quantitative data that puts it in context. And so we are an aid to the amazing technologists who try to quickly ramp up on new code bases. But boy, are we an aid. Is it different? Is it different? Also, shout out, because it's free, so I can do this. If you go to our website, you can go to a code-based health calculator. So of all this work we've done, this $1 trillion, we've done some white papers, $1 trillion worth of companies. We found 12 metrics that we think matter the most about the health of a code base. Those are literally in our real product. We slightly simplified it so that people could do it themselves. If you go, I just wanted to make sure it was online. It's in beta, but it's accurate. Code-based health calculator. You put in basic information about how big your company is, because the context matters for how it's going to get evaluated. And it's about 12 questions that you should know off the top of your head. You'll get the score just like if you were running the scan. Listeners, I'm happy to talk with you the results if you send me a screenshot. We don't save it. It's private to you. But if you want someone to look at you and see the maturity of your code on the 12 metrics that we think are the most important for code-based health, it's a pretty fun tool. Shout out to the team for building it.
Awesome.
The most important one, I know we're late. Most important one, and I get to work in my favorite overused expression, but man, it's my favorite. A huge portion, I started this business to help bridge the gap between tech and non-tech. I coded a long time ago, but I wasn't a coder when I started this business, so I was one of our audiences before I really started to understand tech deeply. In our code-based health scan, so code-based health is like non-functional requirements. Of all of the possible metrics that matter, there's one that matters the most for whether or not a company will pass diligence or pass this. And that's not just qualitatively. Our score reflects the most important factor, most important variable, and it is data. Would either of you like to guess what it is?
I have nothing quick is coming to mind. Number of for loops.
I like the cleverness, but it's a simpler one than that.
Yeah, I don't know.
The retention rate of the major contributors to the code base.
Yeah.
Because, and this is the phrase I use over and over, if you use it, send me a nickel. I hope I trademarked it sometime. Having a code base without the coders is like having a half-written novel without the novelist. Code doesn't end There's no amount of documentation that is a substitute for the folks who actually understand it and understand how the pieces work. And so in that business where we do diligence, if too many of the major subject matter experts have left, that is the deal killer. And shout out to Dave Mango, who's also observed high developer turnover is an anti-pattern. That there's also probably something, is it fishy in Denmark? Rotten in Denmark, that people might be choosing to leave too. So that's the single biggest factor in, if you had to pick one, about whether or not a code base is healthy, are many of the deepest expertise developers still around.
That makes sense on a lot of levels because you're maintaining expertise. It's a signal on the quality of the team and the team culture. Yeah, that tracks.
We did not know that quantitatively when we started, and it was fun to have data back that up. So
yeah, it must be so cool to play around in that space, test out hypotheses. Like my for loop example was a bit of a joke, but maybe the number of Python files, like if you have a lot of files, that could mean you're over organizing. If you have the right amount of files, it's perfect. And then you have one mono file, that's bad. So there are many things that I would be interested in testing out. That's super cool.
Exactly. It's a really fun data set.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I will summarize some of the high level insights that I got, at least from this episode. First and foremost, fear within organization leads to very bad decisions. Also, to increase Gen AI adoption within an organization, specifically from a management perspective, you should look to share legal white papers and think about the ROI. The returns often outweigh the investments. And also, equating Gen AI to open source, I think, is a great way to put it into perspective. Would you use your hand if you have a hammer? Probably not. And then also when evaluating code, it's important to have both a qualitative and a quantitative lens, and quantitative can set the stage for this qualitative analysis. And then finally, some career advice. Get to the top of your field if you can, because the analogy that I've heard used is if you climb to the top of a tree and you want to jump to a different tree, well, you'll only fall as far as, and then this is where the analogy falls apart, and I'm forgetting it, but it still sort of sticks. If you're a squirrel and you want to jump to the top of another tree, you should probably get to the top of your tree first instead of climbing that other tree. That said, changing fields and doing that tree hopping jump is challenging. So know that it could be stressful. And then finally, don't call your family a business. So Matt, if people want to learn more about you,
don't call your business a family. Don't call your
certainly don't call your family a business.
And also both. Neither one. They're
you know what?
Different.
Yeah, that is a good point. Yes, don't do either. Anyway, so Matt,
don't do either. They are different.
Yeah, they are. So if people want to learn more about you or Sema, where should they go?
SemaSoftware.com, SEMA software. Clicking those buttons of contact us definitely gets to me. Would love to hear from your listeners, and what an incredibly fun conversation. Ben, Michael, what a freaking treat. Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, it was our pleasure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining. All right, until next time, it's been Michael Burke and my co-host,
Ben Wilson.
And have a good day, everyone.
We'll catch you next time.